Hi, my name's Elle Stokes. I'm an NYT member and social media ambassador, and this is
Hey, I'm Andy. I am a director and I direct theatre, also film, and I'm also an acting coach for film and TV as well.
lovely. So I did a audition course with you at the National Youth Theatre, well, like a couple of weeks ago now, and I found like the way you work really interesting and the way you talked about sort of acting and self-tapes in your own career. And then you said, because they were talking about it being the nearly the 70th anniversary of NYT, and you said that you joined around the 20th anniversary. So I just sort of wanted
Not
to
the
find
20th,
out
the 50th.
the 50th. Oh, wait, where are we at? I don't know, I completely got that messed up in my head. I just wanted to find out a little bit sort of before all this stuff, like amazing stuff kicked off in your career. What sort of attracted you to NYT? Like, how did you hear about it?
So I joined, yeah, it was 2006 when I joined, when NYT was 50 years old, and I was 18 at the time, and I knew some actors in my kind of A-level drama group, who I think our teacher had suggested should join. And at the time, I guess since the age of about 14 or so, I'd been involved in theatre as like a backstage stage manager, lighting, sound type person, getting involved in school plays, getting involved in like amateur theatre in my local area. I grew up in Hertfordshire, so just outside of London, although London was not a place that I ever really went to as a kid. Um, so I'd been doing a lot of that stuff backstage, and I found out that NYT had backstage courses. And so, with my friends having come back from a summer course and started raving about it, I was like, well, is there a road for me? Because I didn't see myself as an actor at all. I saw myself more as someone who was interested in that backstage stuff. Went for an interview at Holloway Road, and yeah, joined the lighting and sound course. And I did that. And then I had a really wonderful few years of doing projects with the NYT because the backstage courses, I suppose, there's a little bit more, there's less NYT members who are backstage members, and so as a result, if you're available and you're up for it, there are more opportunities for you potentially to get involved in projects more regularly. And so I did a few years of stage management, lighting, sound, that kind of thing on NYT shows. And it was during that time that I was kind of discovering, whilst at uni, that I wanted to direct, and that actually this interest in backstage stuff was really an interest in creating the vision for theatre, which is, a director's job.
But how did you sort of get attracted more to that director's role of creating the vision rather than the sort of stage management or lighting side of like the aesthetics of the picture or like sort of the running of the wheels?
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was a moment for me, I think it was maybe 2017, and NYT were doing a project at the Hackney Empire, which was two Shakespeare plays. I think it was Henry V and Much Ado About Nothing. And I was involved in the lighting team. And I remember there was an evening where the show, I think it was the opening night of the show, and no, it was the closing night of the show, and I was asked to basically stay late and do the get out and to get rid of all of the lights that we'd hung in the space. And meanwhile, all of the actors who had become my friends were going off to the pub to celebrate. And I remember thinking, oh, this is interesting that there seems to be a kind of, in this role, a bit of a distance between me and the cast.
Mm.
And there's a wonderful community in the backstage part of things, which I was really enjoying. But I suppose actors and the stuff that takes place in a rehearsal room is the stuff that I think I was discovering I was most interested in. And at school, when I was doing backstage stuff, I was always involved in that bit of the process because, roles aren't quite as defined in a school
Yeah.
environment. But as I was entering the profession, I was like, oh, interesting. This is putting me into a part of the process, which is not my favorite bit. The rehearsal room is my favorite bit. Being amongst actors is my favorite bit. And so that was the clincher for me. Like not being allowed to go to the pub with the cast was the kind of moment of going, do you know what? Maybe there's a role for me which puts me more in with that community, because that's where I feel like I thrive and what sparks my imagination, really.
Mm. And you've got like at this point, I know you're sort of an acting coach and a director, and you've been a writer director. How do you balance those kind of in your current work? How do you balance those kind of strands of different work and different opportunities?
Well, I think we're in a world now where you can be many things. I remember early on in my kind of journey towards being a director, things felt a little bit more compartmentalized, a bit more kind of binary, like are you a director or are you a writer or are you an actor? Whereas now, like, to use the American term, like there's a bit more embracing of, the kind of triple hyphenate, someone who can be all those things. Having said that, I do still really believe that in order to master any of those jobs, you have to really deep dive into each of them. And so even though now I'm in a place where I kind of wear slightly different hats at different times, I'm really pleased that what I did early in my kind of journey into directing, I went to Reading University and I did film and theatre. And I had options there as to how much theatre I did, how much film I did.
Mm,
And I really actively chose to lean into theatre. And by my third year, I was only doing theatre, wasn't really doing much film stuff as part of that course. And then I followed that through by doing an MA in theatre directing at a place called Birkbeck, really brilliant vocational training for 2 years. Um, and then, for at least 10 years, really just focused on theatre making, started to specialize in new writing, working with writers, developing new plays. Um, and I suppose the thing about being a theatre director is that you become expert in how to work with actors. And so the acting coaching thing is in film and TV, and is very much a result of, I suppose, training as a theatre director. You kind of at your best, you know how to communicate with actors to get into the psychology of a character with them. And so the acting coaching thing has kind of been a result of the directing training, the theatre directing training. Um, and then it's only recently, only after kind of, 12 years or so of just focusing on theatre, that I have then, while spending time as an acting coach on sets, kind of gone, oh, do you know what? Maybe it's time for me to reconnect with my love for film, and to sort of start to think about how my process as a theatre director can be transposed into a process for filmmaking. And I feel at the beginning of that journey, really, it's only been the last 3, 4 years that I've started to direct short films, and now I'm writing a feature film. So I guess, yes, I'm in a place where I do wear different hats now, but that's a result of kind of focusing in on each one of those roles, kind of one at a time.
mhm. I think that's really interesting because as an actress, I feel like there's a question I get from people typically like outside the industry, which is like, do you want to work in theatre or film or TV? And I'm generally like, well, wherever they'll give me a job, I'll go. But
Yeah,
obviously, like
yeah.
you've got a bit more choice, but it seems like you've like had this sort of extensive experience and training in theatre, which has led you more to sort of like the film and TV stuff you're doing now. And then obviously like
Mm.
you've got other theatre projects you're working on. Do you have a preference now over theatre or film or TV? Like if you could,
Or screen.
yeah.
Well, um, I definitely want to work in both, for the rest of my career. Like I would never want to say goodbye to theatre, and I'm getting a lot from the experience of starting to direct on sets myself and make films. Um, so I don't think that I have a preference that would ever lead me to lean into just one or the other. The thing I would say is that, partly because of that interest in backstage stuff early on, I have always loved the process of bringing all the departments together. So when you come out of a rehearsal room and you go into a tech in a theatre, and you're then working as a director, not just with actors, but with stage management, with lighting designers, with sound designers, designers. Um, and everyone is, like a different section of an orchestra pulling their weight towards telling that story. And a film set is just like that. A film set is basically like a theatre tech stretched out over days and days and weeks. And so it's one of my favorite bits of the theatre making process. It is what filmmaking feels like. Um, uh, of course, there's two other bits of the filmmaking process as well, which is the writing and development process, and then on the other end, the editing process. But in terms of the shooting, it feels closest to being in a theatre tech. Um, and in terms of like preferences, I mean, I suppose the other thing that I'm discovering is that it allows you to tell slightly different stories or to tell stories in slightly different ways. Um, I would say in theatre, a lot of my work has been like fairly expressive. So, sort of staging impossible things in imaginative ways in a theatre world. And in film, I made a horror short film last year, and even though it was a genre film, whilst it had a dreamlike quality, you're dealing in a language which is all about the conflict between one character and the environment they're in, and there's a kind of hyper reality to some of what we're filming, and so I'm really enjoying exploring that in a way that theatre doesn't always allow me to, or just is not what I've done in theatre. Um, conflict operates in a different way. In theatre, it's all about the conflict between people, and in film, it's about the conflict sometimes between a person and the environment they're in, the world they're in. I don't really have a clear answer to the question. I'm just relishing the differences and the new things that I'm able to explore as a result of a new medium.
Well, it's a very good answer. I don't care if it's clear or not. It's just very interesting to hear your
Yeah.
opinions on it. You've got a really impressive sort of back catalogue of work in your career already. And obviously, like you're quite young, you're going to keep going. Can you sort of take me sort of like, so we've talked about some of your training with NYT, with uh, Reading, with the Burbank. Um, where did you go from there? Like, what was your sort of first professional jobs?
Well, as part of the Birkbeck training, and I kind of, I suppose, see that as a bit of a kind of watershed where I, from that point, could kind of call myself a professional theatre director. That's not to say that I couldn't have done that when I was at uni. I think you're a professional as soon as you sort of choose to wear that hat.
Mm,
But I think I personally only felt like I could kind of call myself that after that moment because it was when I actually had a vocational training that meant that I had a process. Um, and also, perhaps more importantly, that was the moment where I started to actually uh, get professional work. And so from that Birkbeck moment onwards, the second year of Birkbeck, you do a placement. And so I went to Leeds Playhouse. It used to be called West Yorkshire Playhouse. And I was resident director there for a year, assisting on lots of shows. So those assistant opportunities were my first professional work, allowed me to kind of get to know other directors and their processes, to build a relationship with a professional theatre. I made some small pieces of work while I was there. So I guess there was that. But then the other thing, of course, you can do early on in your career as a director is to make your own work independently. And so I formed a theatre company when I was at uni called Squint.
mm,
And shortly after Birkbeck, I started to focus the kind of efforts of that theatre company on new work, seeking out writers who I was inspired by, interested in the work of, presenting their work at like short play nights that we would host. And then I found two collaborators, Adam and Lee, and they were both writers. We started as a three to make full length new writing projects collaboratively in a kind of like TV writers' room sort of style, which is quite unusual in theatre for there to be multiple authors. Um, and we made three full length plays together over the years that we just a couple of years ago ended up publishing in a book along with lots of stuff for how we made them. And so I remember early on sort of sniffing out that you're going to have to a little bit as an early career director not wait for someone to tell you you can do something, but basically go, this is happening, and we might need some support to make it happen, but it's happening whether you like it or not. And there was a little bit of privilege that I had that allowed me to do that. I remember my dad during my MA at Birkbeck was paying for my accommodation in London. That was a huge help, and it freed me up to be able to make money where I needed to, but also do some stuff with friends that was either unpaid or low pay, and just get it out there in front of an audience and invite people to it. So yeah, the theatre company stuff was pretty fundamental at that stage.
Have you always been involved with National Youth Theatre, or did you sort of do the training and then go away to do your own work and then sort of come back to work with them again?
That's such an interesting question, I think, of like when you are trying to build a relationship with a company that maybe you've been involved with early career, how do you then kind of like, I suppose, let them know or position
Mm,
yourself where they then see you as a professional, or as a kind of mid-career artist or
mm,
whatever. And I again I do remember with NYT having done lots of stuff as a member, backstage and things like that. I had great relationships with the wonderful people who run NYT. But it took a little bit of going away and coming back to kind of go, hey, I'm sort of hoping to be a director now. Um, for me, that was like going off and making a bit more work at uni. I remember in my third year of uni, I focused a bit more on what I was doing there than NYT stuff. And then obviously Birkbeck was on the horizon. And so a combination of those two things, kind of taking a show to Edinburgh with my theatre company, making little bits and pieces at uni, applying to Birkbeck, all of this when there was the opportunity I could let MYT know about, could actually invite them ultimately to some work. That then starts to, I suppose, give a sense of like where I'm heading. And NYT fortunately started to go, okay, well, it looks like Andy's got some potential in this area, so let's give him an assistant director opportunity at NYT. And ultimately, then I directed courses and now direct shows from time to time for the company. So that's how I did it. And I think there is something there sometimes about going away and coming back with your new credentials, that can be really important when you're trying to make a relationship grow.
mm. What sort of advice would you give to people that are maybe like in NYT now, thinking about going into NYT, just coming out, that would be interested in having the similar sort of career as you? So potentially as an acting coach, as a director, as a writer director, what sort of advice would you give to that age group?
Um, I think the importance of getting to know yourself and your own taste, the work you're interested in, the stories you're looking to tell. It's such a journey that, I still feel like I'm on that journey in terms of going, what is it that only I can direct? What is it that actually is that I have such a connection to that it's a project that I have to work on. And I think the sooner you can get stuck into that question, the better. And I think one of the things that I wish that I'd have been told when I was that age is be unapologetic about whatever your taste is. I think when I went to Birkbeck, the sort of people pleaser in me tried to kind of become the sort of director that really liked Chekhov. that really respected Shakespeare. And actually, that was good. It was good to entertain those things. But ultimately, it was years later that I actually made a show, which I won't mention, but it was one that I was like, it was the first piece of work that I made where I sort of felt like when I was watching it, it wasn't really me. It was like I'd made something that was sort of doing an impression of the kind of theatre that I think I
Mm.
should make as a proper theatre director, and it felt horrible. It felt like
Yeah.
really
Inauthentic.
yeah, really inauthentic and like I just didn't have a good time watching it. It was a real watershed for me of from that point on being quite unapologetic about some of those things that I think I'd known since I was a teenager about my taste, that I love a horror film, I love a thriller, I love a twist. I love real slow burn character-led drama, like all of these things that maybe I felt as though I couldn't be open about. I was suddenly kind
Mm.
of able to go, yeah, that's my taste. That's what I love. And I kind of haven't looked back. And you still obviously have to keep on searching for where are you at now? What are the stories that you want to tell now? And what's the style you're interested in or whatever. But I think I'm better at listening to myself than I used to be. Um, and one other thing is that I wouldn't call myself a theatre writer. I've only ever been a theatre director, sometimes involved in making work from scratch, but not a writer. Whereas in film, I am writing as well as directing, and it's been really lovely to discover that I do feel I can write for screen, and I think that's because you can write in pictures, and I know what I'm doing with pictures. Um, Theatre is very dialogue led, um, but film, the short film that I made, which is doing festivals at the moment, the horror film I mentioned, I wrote the first draft of the script just in images. I avoided there being any dialogue, and I have never felt more like I can put something on a page than that moment. And it's also a film which is grounded in lived experience of like losing a parent. I feel really energized by having found a medium that I feel I can put sort of pen to paper on, and therefore can kind of dive into bits of my lived experience that perhaps were harder to explore when I was always having to rely on collaborators. It's allowing me to kind of tap into some stuff that I haven't been able to explore before.
Mm. That's so lovely to hear about. I think one of the reasons you stood out to me as a director when we were working together, and one of the reasons I wanted to interview is that you seem very aware of not being judgmental or generalizing, or it can feel a lot when you're working with people in theatre or screen that people will say, oh, like, this is the opinion you've got to have if you want to make it anywhere. And you internalize these things without really even questioning them until
Mm,
maybe someone else says, no, you don't need to have that idea. And it's so it just
mm,
felt very refreshing to be in the room with you and you say sort of giving advice, but then being like, well, this advice won't always apply to everything.
mm.
And it seems like that's something you've maybe liberated yourself with that you're now able to sort of incorporate into your teaching and your work. Is really lovely to be around.
I think yeah, there's a lot of generalizations, aren't there, that I think can tie you up in knots.
Mm.
A lot of externals that, as an actor or a director or a writer, you hear about, and you feel as though, okay, I've got to try and follow all of this guidance and appease these external factors. But ultimately, like you're going to tie yourself up in knots, and so as much as possible on a good day, I try and do that sort of reflective work first. Why is this something I need to make? What is it that I want to make? How does it really energize me and my taste? And then you can start to look outwards and go, okay, well, what's the right theatre for that project, or who are the right collaborators? But that first bit of work, I think for a long time I I didn't I didn't do robustly enough.
My last question for you, which is I've been asking everyone I
Mm.
interview, if you usually I ask if like if you remember your audition monologue, but I don't know if they from
Mhm.
NYT, but I don't know if they actually make you do one because it's sort of if you're
No,
like you don't need to know one.
not not for backstage.
No.
Although one thing I will say that's quite funny is that like even though I'd done years as a backstage member, I remember there was a project happening in China, in Shanghai, with NYT. It was a version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and NYT asked me if I would come in for an interview to maybe go and be like the stage manager on this project. And so I went to the NYT building to go and meet the director, a brilliant man called Joel Scott. And when I arrived there, he just assumed that I was there to audition as an actor. And so he just ushered me into the room and I just joined in. I was quite comfortable. I was quite comfortable joining in because I'd done, I was directing outside of NYT and acting a bit at uni. Um, and so I joined in and then he cast me. And so I'm probably the only backstage member in NYT history who's also
It's been
acted
cast.
in an NYT show as well.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Have you got any sort of monologues that you really like that you sort of wish you'd see actors do more or that you'd love to direct?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky one. No, I
I can
see
just
so
I can
many.
change it to just play rather than monologue if that's easier.
A play. Yeah, yeah. Well, just last night, I was actually talking to another director. I'm at Royal Welsh College at the moment. I teach a lot in drama schools, and I'm down here teaching naturalism. And I was talking to another director working here last night. We're talking. He asked me this question, like, what's the play you'd love to do? Um, and The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, I just think is the most wonderful play. I love how expressive it is. Everything you're seeing is through the sort of subjective lens of that lead character, Tom's kind of experience. And yeah, I love that play so much. And then the other play that popped into my head, it's not necessarily one that I'd like to direct, but it was like just to kind of I guess it's a play like this that I really want to find for myself sometime soon is a play called Downstate, which was on a few years ago at the National Theatre by Bruce Norris, and it's all set in a kind of American halfway house for sex offenders, and it asks the audience just a really simple and uncomfortable question, which is, can someone who has committed an atrocious sexual offence be rehabilitated? Can they be integrated back into society? And theatre like that play by Bruce Norris, which is putting a question that uncomfortable into the room and asking for your empathy and your understanding over something which is really complex societally. I just can't get enough of that, and that was an incredible play. Uh, that was just another one that came to mind when I was talking yesterday.
Thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Pleasure, pleasure. It was really lovely, Al. Thank you.